Welcome to Westminster. Today, a very special guest. It's the SDP's Brexit spokesman and political commentator. I'm sure you know him. It's Patrick O'Flynn. Patrick, how are you, mate?
I'm fine, bit hot, but soldiering on in the heat. How's it going, Michael?
Well, yeah, I'm absolutely melting here, but you know, you could the political temperature certainly heating up. A few things I want to talk to you about. We've got to start, I think, with the illegal migration figures from yesterday. It's another very unwelcome record. 235 migrants in a single day on 17 boats. Patrick, what do you make of all this?
Well, it's a scandal. And the first thing to say is I think our old boss, Nigel Farage, deserves a lot of credit for using his huge social media platforms to make sure it can't be ignored. And I think it's very significant that this very morning, 8:10 a.m. Radio 4 Today programme finally started covering the story. So, you know, it's achieved critical mass, hasn't it? I think two other obvious things quickly to say is, first of all, the government, you know, a year ago, Boris Johnson put out a statement saying, if you come like this, we'll send you back. No action whatsoever. Home Secretary Priti Patel, very disappointing. She seems to be looking for distraction, displacement activity, reviewing a role of the Royal Navy. Well, that'll just mean bigger boats to take the irregular migrants to our shores to escort them in. That won't achieve anything. Trying to blame France, well, you could equally say if you're living in Calais or another French coastal town, the only reason your quality of life is being undermined by irregular migrant camps springing up is because Britain is known to be such a soft touch. There's no other reason for those guys to gravitate all the way through France to the northern coast. And the final point is Keir Starmer and Labour have said absolutely nothing about this story, not a single press release. I was looking this morning, they put out 24 press releases this week, nothing on this issue. So we can tell they don't care. So if Labour wants to work out why it can't get above the mid-30s in the polls and it can't win back the old red wall working class vote, you don't have to look much further.
I mean, it's interesting. You've said a little less conversation, a little more action, please, based on what Boris Johnson, Prime Minister, previously said. What do you think the government needs to be doing on this?
Well, I think they've got to get ready, haven't they, for January the 1st, when, you know, all the restrictions of the EU fall away. And they need, you know, a clear-headed plan of how to tackle this. Now, I think it'll have to be very controversial. They'll go through a lot of pain with the Guardianistas if they've got the courage. But I think we've got to start looking at offshore asylum processing, which is something Australia did set up in Papua New Guinea, and they stopped all their boats. Now, there's a bit of cruel to be kind about that because, you know, boats were sinking, migrants were drowning, people smugglers were coining it in, and a few years now down the line, we're in a similar situation. So if we could put the word out that if you try and get across this way and land in the United Kingdom, you will not be allowed to set foot on the mainland until your asylum application has been processed. And if it turns out you've come, or are suspected to have come from a safe country, you won't be getting refugee status, and you'll be kind of left in a kind of adequate holding center until you remember what your country of origin is. So it's up to you. You can, you know, this could be a faraway British dependency. We could actually pay a North African government, who knows? But that's the sort of step that will get rid of the pull factor. Another thing is transforming the actual asylum deportation regime and cutting down on the grounds for appeal and the numbers of appeal. That's the sort of stuff Priti Patel needs to be getting in order for January the 1st, not just thinking of ways to distract and complain and blame others.
Yeah, I mean, the noises that I've seen come out of the Home Office have talked about the Dublin regulations, have talked about EU laws, have talked about activist lawyers and how seemingly they feel that they're heavily restricted in what they can do till the transition period ends at the end of this year. I mean, I don't really think that's good enough in terms of the numbers that are building up. You cannot simply sit back and watch this get worse and worse and worse, surely. But what I'd like to ask you, Patrick, is what's your assessment more broadly in terms of the EU negotiations, Brexit, the end of the transition period? Is there going to be a deal or not? Obviously, you're a former MEP. What's your assessment of where we are in terms of that process?
Well, I think it's the one significant area where, you know, the likes of you and me can actually be pleased with the government. You know, it's pretty obvious now the government's not bluffing. It won't extend transition. I think we've had the Bank of England saying, actually, you know, even from their conventional point of view, a no-deal Brexit is a tiny blip compared to ongoing coronavirus measures going into next year and the hit that coronavirus has caused. So I think the kind of the Remainer economic fear factor has fallen away. Under Michael Gove, I think we got quite a forensic set of preparations. We are spending the money on investing, you know, for our customs procedures, etc. For no deal. We're putting out some big public information campaigns about the opportunities of no deal. So this time, I think the EU has to conclude that we're not bluffing. And then this time we're going to see their bottom line, you know, and they are going to shift. Whether it's to shift enough to get a deal by December the 31st, who knows? Well, in fact, it would probably have to be by the end of October. Who knows? Or what we might get is a bare bones deal, and then into next year, the start of kind of add-ons. And, you know, I don't personally think that's anything to fear, and the kind of Remainer hysteria in the media will have fallen away, you know, and if we then reach sector specific deals gradually, I'm okay with that. But I think finally we're on the right Brexit track.
I just want to change gears now, because there was one of the biggest reactions I've had recently was on this, and I've seen you commented on it, was about this BBC bite-size white privilege video. And I saw you put on reflection, the most insidious aspect of this, which I tweeted an initial reaction to last night, is the BBC's use of the term explain to describe an eminently contestable analysis. That kids are led to believe these are established truths and cannot be contested is awful. Patrick, firstly, what is your view on that video, and also on the BBC more broadly? I mean, they're coming in for a wave of criticism. We've seen the defund the BBC campaign pick up a lot of momentum quite quickly. What's your assessment overall on that?
Well, I think the BBC abandoned any pretense even at editorial impartiality over the unlawful Black Lives Matter demonstrations, the quote largely peaceful gatherings that ended with dozens of police officers getting injured. And opinion polling was very thin on the ground at the time, but subsequently has come out, and I think you can see from that broadly about the British public are about 2-1 against what's been going on, heavily against the politicisation of football, you know, and the racialisation of almost everything, you know. And the BBC Bite Size is obviously a specific educational focused service, and for that to be kind of pushing this militant left-wing kind of whiteness theory, and whiteness is some sort of pathological state that has to be apologized for, that has intrinsic privilege. I mean, it's all nonsense basically, and it's propaganda, and at the very least it's something that adults should be debating in contestable you know, political campaigns, not something that schools, I mean, and particularly I suspect this is happening with teachers as well as BBC Bite Size. Children respect their teachers. You know, the teacher teaches you algebra, they teach you what's factually correct. If they then start teaching you something called white privilege, the pressure is on to assume that's factually correct and incontestable. But there are lots of different interpretations. You know, obviously white working class boys seem to be the most disadvantaged group in our society. White working class girls, various establishment reports now agree, were actually victimized by the grooming gangs, partly because of their race and partly weren't protected because of their race, as opposed to the ethnic category of most of their abusers. So there's whole areas where you can now say that actually, if you want to play this game and racialize everything, being white could be said to be, you know, a penalty for many people. But, you know, we don't want to go down that path, do we? I thought we were trying to build a colorblind society, but the woke left seems to be hyping this up. BBC completely going along with it. And I think a fair-minded person, you know, with basic bit of sociological knowledge would say there's an argument that if you're in the biggest, what they call in-group in any society, there's a bit of an advantage to that, you know, and we are obviously still a largely white majority society. So maybe there are some advantages, but equally smaller in-groups can have deeper bonds of loyalty to counterbalance that. But that's nothing to do with whiteness per se. There'll be other countries and other societies with non-white majorities, and to actually racialize it to that degree where you're telling people that whiteness intrinsically means privilege, is massively contestable. Most normal people would think it's a load of rubbish. And yet we have BBC Bitesize and I dare say our schools pushing this as fact that has to be explained and not advanced or argued. I think that is very insidious indeed. And to be honest, another nail in the coffin of the BBC license fee.
Yeah, and I just want to, you've got enormous experience in the media world. You were obviously the chief political commentator at Daily Express for many years. What do you make of this sort of BBC change? That video to me a couple of years ago wouldn't have looked out of place on a sort of fringe Corbynista website where it was sort of stayed. And now this is being pushed, obviously, by the BBC mainstream broadcast. Why do you think the BBC has gone in this direction?
I think it's partly a generational time lag thing where the people who've come out of university in the last 15 years, much more kind of indoctrinated into this ultra woke cultural Marxism, whatever you might call it, are rising up to positions of more prominence and authority within the BBC, which draws massively, disproportionately from, the London area, from sort of middle class university graduates, from our other big cities, and misses out on, common sense, provincial, normal people opinion. So I think there's been a whole cadre of people moving through the ranks, and we've now got to a position where they're quite senior and are dictating editorial policy. You see something similar in terms of corporate, what they call social responsibility, drifting into this kind of ultra woke stuff, and particular big brands swinging behind Black Lives Matter, which wants to defund the police and presumably therefore leave them open to having their stock looted, but they don't seem to care about that. So I think that is a large part of what's going on. You've also, I think, post, the Cameron era of Tories swallowed a lot of this stuff. And the Conservatives are only now creeping out to contest it. You have very good MPs like Tom Hunt in Ipswich, who I know has written for Westminster, but you have equally like the new female MP in Newbury. I can't remember her full name, Laura somebody, but she took a knee, so the Conservative Party needs to get the courage of its convictions on this.
Yeah, and I just want to talk to you about the sort of lockdown, coronavirus, the approach the government have taken, because I saw that you put a tweet about, I don't often think this, but right now the Tories need to channel a little more Maggie Thatcher. Never thought I'd see you write that when it comes to getting our schools fully open in September. It's striking to me, Patrick. I've been looking at the facts recently. The fact is, in the latest set of ONS figures, in terms of all deaths in England and Wales for the weekend in 24th of July, only 2.4% were linked to COVID. And at the same time, I've got friends now who are being told that they're not going to need to return to a London office until next year. And then even then, it's only going to be once a week thereafter. These are massive changes. In terms of the figures, we've seen that some people are, think that the number of people that are dying is far higher than the reality. What's your take on this situation overall?
Well, it looks, doesn't it, like Boris Johnson has been spooked by his own illness, and he's gone from what you could say was a slightly flippant approach at the very start to massively overcompensating and talking up fear of a second wave. And, you've had the flip-flops on the issue of masks. A few weeks ago when lockdown was lifted, he was all on about firing up the engines of this vast British economy. And that seems to have gone by the wayside as well. I think it's interesting, actually, that on all the issues where there's a lot of scratchiness and discontent about the government, and we've talked about some of them today, the Black Lives Matter stuff, the illegal migration stuff, and now I think people thinking the government losing a sense of proportion on COVID and on civil liberties, the sort of political energy is all from what would be defined as the right. So Starmer and Labour, people who are upset with the government on these issues would think Starmer and Labour are far, far worse. So I think that's why the Tory poll rating is apparently unaffected. If there was, dare I say it, Mr. Farage to set up an entity challenging some of these things, I think it very quickly could get to 10% in the polls. And maybe put a lot of pressure on the Conservatives, you know, as UKIP and the Brexit Party have done in the past.
So is your assessment that the government are being too guarded in terms of their approach on the economy and when it comes to coronavirus? Would you like to see them opening up further and going further than they actually are?
Yeah, I think so. And, you know, the whole point was to set up track and trace and an ability to clamp down on local outbreaks. And, you know, the Leicester situation, you know, was resented at the time, but seems to have worked. So I think we are developing the ability to do that. And the sort of key metrics, I think, are the number of people in hospital and ill in hospital, which hardly seems to be shifting at all. You know, it may be that younger people are a bigger proportion of those catching the disease at the moment, but you know, if the vast majority of them are recovering without needing hospital treatment, that broadly you'd have thought would be a positive thing. I think the government's going to need to show some nerve and actually recognise that the freezing up of the NHS is probably, we think, already caused about 20,000 premature deaths from heart disease, you know, late diagnosis of cancers and things like that. So the health issue, the government's become skewed on alone, but when you take the cost benefit analysis to look at the impact on the economy and living standards, you know, and public debt and sustainability of that, then it would seem to me the government is in the wrong place. And I'm not saying that COVID isn't a threat or that a second wave isn't a threat, but I think there's this sort of hair trigger overreaction at the moment based on very few cases. And, you know, the whole idea of preventing the NHS being overrun, well, the NHS has got vast spare capacity at the moment.
Great insight. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Michael.
If you've enjoyed this, by the way, guys, remember to subscribe, and I look forward to speaking to Patrick again soon.
Thanks, Michael. Cheers now.